Would the representative from the Regional Center Association know?
Is Eileen available to?
I don't see her.
We had reached out to ARCA and asked this. At this point, we did not have clarity as to the number.
Do you know?
You know, Gloria Wong, the director, she's coming up, so she'll be able to address this for us.
Excellent, thank you.
Good afternoon.
I appreciate the work going into it, but I just wanted to kind of know what the denominator is today, how many have been established.
I'm Gloria Wong, the executive director of one of the regional centers, Eastern Los Angeles Regional Center, one of the 5 pilot regional centers. I believe we're probably about 160 total right now, 150 to 160.
Okay, you've confused me.
No, the local advisory committees.
Oh, how many advisory committees have taken place?
Yes.
Probably, I would say about 3. And I will speak to the fact that you will have, every regional center is already working on the development of their local advisory committee. I will be up here on your issue 9, and I can speak to that a little bit further.
Perfect. But so far, of the 21, 3 have been established.
I believe it's 3.
I just wanted to know where we are today.
There's movement.
Got it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Any questions?
Let's, finance, you see your question on page 20 with regard to the 30-day notice being provided. Can you respond?
The Department of Finance. We have no objections to the proposed change to the provisional language.
Excellent. Great, thank you. Let's move on to Marty Emoto, Director, Founder of the California Disability Center Community Action Network. If you just share your perspective with us.
Thank you, Marty Emoto, CDCAN family member. I'm also a member of the self-determination work group from the first meeting back in December last year when it was called by Director Delgadillo. And first, I want to just applaud the department's aggressive work in trying to get this self-determination waiver and the program underway. I mean, we've been meeting pretty intensely, physical meetings, but also on the phone. The stakeholder group is broad, and the meetings have been productive. A couple of points, though. The issue of the resubmission of the waiver, I think, needs to be a little more kind of drilled down, because it's from my understanding, and this was mentioned in the stakeholder meetings, it was pulled back by or requested to be pulled back by CMS because there wasn't adequate, from their definition of the word, public notice on the California website for public comment, and that we had to pull it back and then resubmit it along with some other changes. And so we were told in the stakeholder group that at some point in February or late February or March, that the waiver would be resubmitted per their guidelines of public notice. So the question, I guess, is, and I asked that question in the stakeholder meeting, is that first, when will the waiver, and I don't mean to put anybody on the spot, well, actually I do, but gently, when will the waiver be resubmitted, and what's the consequences that it's actually not submitted now? Because this is not just the normal, you know, there's a problem with some of the wording or the formatting. It's actually a different reason that hasn't been, as far as I know, been used before.
If I may.
Yes, please.
So actually,
I'm sorry, I shouldn't be. You know.
You're an expert at this. You know what to do. That's fine.
I appreciate the opportunity to clarify, and certainly our work group has been very effective in helping us make sure that we provide the clarification, and thank you, Marty, for that. We do not have, as a department and as a state, the control at this point, because we have already submitted the point of clarification that CMS has requested. And so we're waiting for CMS to return to us their feedback regarding what we just recently submitted. As soon as we have that, is at the point that we can go ahead and start the clock again as far as the submission. So again, we are working very closely with CMS, understanding that process. But Marty is absolutely correct. When we did have the conversation after we submitted the application to CMS in December, that it was requested that we post the information for 30 days. This has not been a practice that we've had to do in past applications. So it was a little bit of a surprise as far as this, but certainly we want to adhere to the requirements of CMS. So we've done that, and again, we're responding quickly to have assurances that we can get the program up and running just as quickly as we can.
And just to add to that, again, I think the department is doing tremendous work with limited resources, and of course, that's a problem for all of us, but that all of us want to get this waiver application submitted, because until that happens, nothing else happens. And I think we all have to work really aggressively. And secondly, a couple of other issues, the issue of transitioning the existing members in the pilot, that, and that's going to be addressed, but that really is of major concern to the existing members of the original self-determination pilot program. We got to get word out to them. The training issue is being addressed, as you said, in a coming meeting, and the advisory committees need to be established. All this is important because outreach is so critical about getting information out there. And I think we're at that point now. I don't think none of us want to wait until the waiver's approved, because that could take a long time. Meanwhile, there's thousands of people out there who want to know good information. And the problem is there's bad information out there as well as good.
Right.
The other thing is to add the issue of disparities. I know this is a separate topic, but to me, disparity issues and cultural competence should never be separated from anything we do. And it needs to be, and thankfully the department has been very good about addressing that issue within self-determination, but I think we need to up our involvement with that and compliance. The problem is always funding and resources, so trying to get information out was originally limited to, I think, 1 or 2 languages, and that's not acceptable. And I think the department is not accepting that either, but the problem is resources, and we need to step up and at least get information out there, at least at the level that Medi-Cal does, which is the threshold languages.
That's right.
And we need to do that because, the other problem of eligibility and lack of getting the services one needs, and to deal with the fair hearing process and all the things that about Lanterman Act and all the rights that people have, is unless you understand what is being told to you or the information that is being sent, then it's a denial of your rights anyways. So again, the department is doing a tremendous job in trying to address these issues, and I think we're all going to have to work better on the disparity issues and to make self-determination a success.
Thank you very much, and I agree, and I always assume that because of the Donnelly-Alatory Act, that threshold languages were the law of the land for all state programs.
Yeah, unfortunately, I actually had that same feeling, and again, it's no reflection on the department, but it seems to differ by agencies, because I work in all the systems, and it's amazing how one agency applies a different standard. And again, it's not a reflection of the commitment, it's just,
It's resources.
it is what it is,
Right.
yeah.
It's resources finance. It's resources.
So give more money, huh?
Right. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Seeing no questions from my colleagues, we will, as we transition to issue 8, and that now that we've been at this for 2 hours and 45 minutes, as the panelists for issue 8 come up, I'm going to encourage everybody to stretch, wiggle your legs, stand up, do whatever you need to do to move the body, keep the blood flowing. I'm going to stand up so my needle doesn't lock up so I won't fall. Yeah, so folks can come on around here. Yeah, come on around. We asked finance to move. LAL still has a role to play, so people can just come on around this side.
So I think this is Rashi's last hearing. She's accepted a job down in the Bay Area.
Really? Wow.
You get them, you train them, they leave.
Folks can just come on around here. Come on around here. Oh, mics. And we can either shift the mic or we'll get the standing mic. We can get the hand mic.
Yeah, there was my sergeant. Hand mic.
And they can just pass it.
Yeah.
You can come on around here because we're going to bring the hand mic over. So as people come through.
Find you back.
We're getting better.
You're doing good on time.
Very.
I know.
Very.
Sequence is important.
It is. I agree. I agree. No, I'm with you.
Yeah, very good.
I pay close attention to those kinds of things
Yeah.
for just that reason.
Yeah.
And, the standing mic, all those things
Yeah.
can shave off.
It's like he used to be staff or something.
So we're just like, no reflection of it. Just want to let you know that we're going to be using some
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Okay, the recess break is now over.
Students back to your desks.
That's right. We'll ask everyone to take your seats again. See, that's the problem with recess. You take recess, nobody wants to come back to class. But recess is very important. We'll ask everybody to again take their seats in the hearing room. Recess is important. I heard with all the chatter, I know everybody's awake. Thank you very much to our panelists. Again, we're moving on to issue number 8, stability of community-based services and support systems. This is again an oversight issue. We're on page 21 of the agenda. And we will hear from the presenters in this order. We're going to start with Ledge Analyst's Office. And I understand that this hearing is your swan song. Good luck to you in your future endeavors.
Oh, thank you very much.
Eileen Ritchie, Executive Director of ARCA. Catherine Blackmore, DRC. Christopher Kent, Assistant Secretary, Health and Human Services Agency. Mr. Rogers from DDS. Ernie Huerta, Self Advocate. Sue North, Director of Government Affairs, California Disability Services Association. And Tony Anderson, Chair of the Lanterman Coalition. We'll start with the LAO.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Rashi Kesarwani with the Legislative Analyst's Office. I believe the Sergeant has made available a handout that we've prepared for this hearing, which provides an overview of major DDS budget solutions over the last decade since 2003-04. In the interest of time, I want to note that we have several pages of background material, but I'm going to jump to page 3 at the bottom where we explain how vendors are compensated in the DDS system. Vendors receive a rate for the provision of services, and vendor rates are set in several ways depending on the type of service that is being provided by the vendor. They are either set by DDS, negotiated with the regional center, or set statutorily. For example, rates for supported living services are negotiated with the regional center, while supported employment program rates are set statutorily. We note on page 4 that there are 2 exceptions to the typical rate-setting processes, and these exceptions occur for Medi-Cal rates as well as for usual and customary rates for services such as public transportation that are mostly used by individuals who are not regional center consumers. On page 5 and 6 of our handout, we provide an overview of caseload over the last decade. In the interest of time, I'll keep moving. And on page 7 and 8, we provide an overview of funding, but I do want to spend the bulk of my time beginning on page 9 with the overview of major DDS budget solutions affecting the community caseload and regional center administration over the last decade. And before I get into the specifics here, I do want to preface my remarks by saying that there were numerous, I believe more than 100 budget solutions that were implemented, particularly over the period of the Great Recession. And so it wouldn't be possible for us to catalog every single thing. What we've tried to do is look at the budget solutions that were estimated to save at least $15 million in general fund. And we've categorized those larger budget solutions into 5 broad areas. First, there was the implementation of vendor rate restrictions to avoid general fund costs. Next, there was the pursuit of additional federal Medicaid funds to offset general fund costs. Third, the department required an increased reliance on what are known as generic resources. These are services that are generally available outside of the DDS system, and other stricter standards for purchasing services to offset or reduce general fund costs. There was also the suspension or alteration of services to reduce general fund costs. And finally, there was the reduction to regional center administration funding. So to start off with the vendor rate restrictions, widespread rate freezes were implemented beginning in 2003-04. And those rate freezes were implemented on such services as community-based and similar day programs, in-home respite, supported living services, and transportation. By 2008-09, all vendors with rates negotiated with the regional center experienced these permanent rate freezes. On page 10 of our handout, we note that there were some exceptions to these permanent rate freezes that are listed at the top of page 10. And once these exemptions were granted, rates were frozen at the new level. Next, the department has implemented median rates beginning in 2008-09. Essentially, this means that when a regional center negotiates a rate with new vendors, they are required not to exceed the median rate for that particular service. And those median rates were reset in 2011-12, and that also resulted in slightly lower median rates. And in doing so, the department avoids costs that would have otherwise occurred if the median rate remained at the higher level. And finally, on the subject of rate restrictions, there were the provider payment reductions that implemented beginning in 2009. And page 11 of our handout provides a chart at the top of the page that provides the percentage reduction that was implemented over those 4 fiscal years in which we did the provider payment reductions, as well as the estimated general fund savings in each of those years. And I also want to note that the supported employment program rate that is set in statute was increased by a net of 14% from 2006-07 to 2008-09. That's because the state implemented a 24% increase in 6-7, followed by a 10% reduction in 2008-09. To move into the next broad area of budget solution, we had the department pursue additional federal Medicaid funds beginning in 2009-10. Variety of methods were used. For example, enrolling eligible consumers in a waiver results in additional federal Medicaid funding, so the department sought to increase waiver enrollment in 2012-13. At the bottom of page 11, we've provided a chart that lays out the additional federal Medicaid funds that were received in each of the fiscal years listed. On page 12, we get into the requirement to increase reliance on generic resources and other stricter standards for purchasing services beginning in 2009-10. And as I explained before, these generic resources are services that are generally available outside of the DDS system, such as public education services or health services such as Medi-Cal or private health insurance. And by maximizing these services, the department is either able to reduce costs or shift costs to that other entity that's providing those services. And in the chart in the middle of the page, we list the generic resources that were required and other stricter standards that were used to achieve cost savings. You can see here that the requirement to use Medi-Cal or private health insurance for health needs and other stricter standards for purchasing treatments, therapies, and devices was estimated to save about $51 million general fund annually. To move to page 13, here we note the suspension or alteration of services. There were a number of services that were suspended or altered. Certain early start services fall under this category. We've listed them in the chart on page 13. Of note is the suspension of social recreational services, camping services, educational services for school-aged children, and non-medical services, which were estimated to save $30 million in annual general fund savings. We also note that the department has reduced regional center administration funding in 2009-10 through 2011-12. That is apart from the issues that were raised earlier in the agenda on the core staffing formula. And on page 14, we list in the chart the savings that were estimated to be achieved in the 3 fiscal years listed. To conclude, this is a very high-level overview of some of the budget solutions that were implemented. There were a number of other budget solutions that have a real impact on the lives of consumers and their families. And we hope this gives you a better sense of all of the changes that have taken place over the last decade. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very comprehensive. We'll move on to Eileen Ritchie.
Chairperson Mitchell, members of the committee, Eileen Ritchie with ARCA. I've been asked to provide an overview of our report on the brink of collapse, the consequences of underfunding California's developmental services system. ARCA consulted with a national expert on rate-setting procedures and developmental services. He examined rates here in California for residential facilities, day programs, and supported employment programs. What he found was that California's residential rates have not kept pace with inflation. States such as New York and Minnesota now fund similar residential facilities at rates 2.5 to 3 times the California rate. California's rate for this service is most comparable to rates paid in Indiana and Idaho, which are smaller states with much lower costs of living. Oregon and New York have work activity and day program rates that are more than double California's daily rate for this same service. New York, Washington, Arizona, and Oregon all have supported employment rates that are almost 83% higher than the same rate paid in California for the same service. In addition, higher real estate and labor costs, including the nation's highest workers' compensation premium, make it very expensive to do business in the state of California. In response to questions that we had heard from legislators, legislative staff, we surveyed regional centers on the number of program closures that have occurred since 2011. And this is what we found. We found that between now, 2011 and now, 435 residential homes closed. That represents a loss of 2,300 available beds. This is the type of loss that limits choice and opportunity for individuals in need of a safe, structured place to live. Regional centers also reported that since 2011, 57 day and work programs have closed their door, a loss of more than 1,200 opportunities for individuals to interact with their peers and in their communities on a daily basis. This also includes many individuals who are no longer participating in paid employment opportunities. Since 2011, 15 supported employment programs have stopped providing this service, resulting in a loss of 176 opportunities for individuals to be supported to work in integrated settings. In a recent survey of those same regional centers, the reason given for recent program closures are fairly consistent. The leading identifiable reason for program closure was, in fact, low rates. The bulk of involuntary program closures can be tracked back to insufficient rates as well, because quality is impacted by the rate that can be paid for the service. The system is unable to recruit new providers at a rate that allows for both the replacement of lost services due to community service provider closures and the demand for new services, such as the demand for new services for the growing number of individuals with autism that are now aging out of the school system and will be coming into our system. This presents a particular challenge for specialized programs that serve individuals with complex behavioral, psychiatric, or medical needs that require negotiated rates. The median rates do not allow negotiation based on the actual cost of the service. What that means is that cuts are required to some parts of the program in order to fall within the capitated rates. And what this means is if programs or service providers are going to try to work within the rate process that we have, the rate setting structure we currently have in California, that they may have to cut program design, staffing, needed clinical and other expertise to serve the individuals that they're trying to serve. In closing, in order to continue receiving federal funding for the system, not only does California make assurances relative to caseload ratios, but they also make assurances that sufficient services are in place to support the number of individuals being served. Current shortfalls are not allowing this to occur. ARCA supports the Linneman Coalition position, and I thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony.
Thank you very much as well. We'll move on to Ms. Blakemore, Disability Rights California.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here and provide you our perspective on the 3 issues that we were asked to talk about. The material is the same as I handed out earlier, and it begins, I think, at page 3. The first issue is what is the impact of the new home and community-based waiver transition requirements, and what do those mean for the developmental disability system? And they really build on concepts of the ADA and integration, and require that we think about how are we going to ensure that people live in integrated and work in integrated community settings, and how do we ensure that there is autonomy and choice for individuals that is maximized in ways that perhaps we had not envisioned it now. On the issue of integration, it means that individuals have access to the greater community. So the community that we all live, work, and play in would be the community that, where someone's living and where someone's working, they would have access to. Some specific kinds of services are not allowed. Those that are on the grounds of state institutions, and in California, there's been specific guidance about not authorizing under Medicaid-funded services, services that are delayed egress or contain secure perimeters that I think require specifically some further looking into as we move from a more institutional model of care to the community. With the issues of autonomy and choice, this is often for individuals in living arrangements, and it says specifically in the guidance things such as the individual must have a lease, they're renting a place from a provider. The individual must have privacy in their unit, including a lockable door, choice of roommates. The individual has to control his or her own schedule, including access to food. The individual can have visitors at any time. The setting is physically accessible. So what that means is rethinking in some ways how we provide residential services in particular. So right now, we expect that individuals in many kind of living arrangements will go someplace during the day, and it's for a set period of time because there won't be staff at the residential living place for individuals. Well, that does not provide individuals with sort of the kind of flexibility and choice that's envisioned. What if someone wants to go to college for 2 hours on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and 4 hours on Tuesday and Thursday, but they want to come home after that? So that means we have to rethink how we provide that. It also means giving people choices of roommates. We currently sort of assign people in many times a roommate, or maybe someone prefers to live on their own, which would have a cost implication to the system. It also says people have access to visitors at any time, can eat their meals when they want. Some residential living arrangements are very structured in terms of when dinner is served, or when people can have visitors, and limitations on when it's sort of after hours and those things. So it's going to require, as we go through a transition process, some rethinking about all of those things. With that, we have a couple of recommendations. First, I want to commend the department for putting together a stakeholder group to look at the transition process. This is a process that has to be fully implemented by 2019. I think they're off to a good start. There's a lot of work ahead, and kind of a small staff trying to do that among other things. I think we need to think about what are the implications for provider rate increases relative to implementing the home and community-based services requirements. If you're going to allow for flexibility, it means that there might have to be staff, and that has implications for the rates we provide things. And I think we should be targeting rate increases to the ability to implement the new requirements, and then be able to report on what is the success in meeting those new requirements as we have those rate adjustments. And then finally, we need to analyze our current settings and determine what do and do not meet the integration standard. We need to wrestle with, as I noted before, the requirements related to delayed egress and secure perimeters. I would encourage that we do that quickly. We get people sort of stuck in living places because we haven't sorted some of that out, or there's delays in developing the kinds of places that people need. Our office has been working with a young man who was living in a juvenile detention facility for over 2 years. He actually became an adult, and the juvenile detention facility decided to allow him to remain in the juvenile facility because it would be unsafe for him to move to the adult facility. The regional center was trying to develop a place for him to go, but it takes a very long period of time. And then it got tied up in, should it be secure perimeter? How are we going to pay for it? Which just resulted in further delays. I'm happy to report that he is, as of a week ago, moved into the community and was at our board meeting last weekend and extraordinarily happy to be out of the detention facility and in his own home, which was managed, I think, by providing some additional staffing levels as opposed to kind of a more locked facility. So a really good outcome for him, but I think illustrative of the kinds of things we need to work through. The second issue you asked me to provide information about was our recent agreement with the Departments of Rehabilitation, Developmental Services, and the State Department of Education. That is really about working and how we get people to work within, that are consumers of the regional center. Just as some notes, California actually doesn't do a very good job in this area so far, and that was really the impetus for us working hard to get an agreement. Now, we are 33rd nationally in the percentage of people with intellectual developmental disabilities engaged in competitive integrated employment. Over the last 5 years, the amount of funding spent on non-employment focused programs has increased, and the amount of funding spent on supported employment has decreased. That is a trend heading in the wrong direction. And in California, our schools use over 70% of the sub-minimum wage certificates that are permitted for schools nationally. So clearly the need to come up with some solutions. We also knew that the Department of Justice had been interested in enforcing the ADA integration requirements, and because of the new HCBS requirements and the Workforce Opportunity and Innovation Act requirements, we decided it was time to approach the 3 agencies and see if we could move that through a less formal, litigious kind of process. So we've been successful. I actually think it's historic that we have 3 agencies that don't always talk to one another, meeting and working on what we call a blueprint for increasing competitive integrated employment. What that agreement says is that competitive integrated employment or post-secondary training and other things are the first option to be considered by planning teams across all 3 agencies, that the agencies will work to promote funding for integrated work and expand supported employment. The agencies will phase out the use of sub-minimum wage. Throughout all of this, we will allow for consumer choice and opportunities to make informed and meaningful choice, and that we will improve integrated interagency coordination. The recommendations we have are, first of all, to repeal the trailer bill language that says regional centers may not provide services, vocational services for individuals who have not yet graduated or received a certificate of completion from their local school district. If we're really serious about interagency coordination, it might be that more than one agency needs to be providing services to that individual during that period of time. And these artificial sort of barriers that we're creating about you have to use a school district service, but you can't use a regional center service, really don't make sense if we're going to ensure that people can get access to real jobs and the training they need for those jobs. Target provider rate increases to supported employment programs and other programs that promote competitive integrated employment, and then again use that to ensure that we're getting outcomes by increasing that funding, that people actually are getting the skills they need to get real jobs. And finally, eliminate provisions in state law which authorize the payment of sub-minimum wage, which really is not allowable. And then finally, I was asked to speak about what are the changes that have had the most significant impact on consumers. I have 2 sort of large buckets of that. First is that we had, as the LAO indicated, broad service categories that are no longer available or otherwise have caps on them. Those are essentially camp social recreation, for example, and a cap on respite. In our experience, those caps have had a particular impact on communities of color because those are services that families rely on in terms of supporting consumers who are in their family home. And then second, what we know is that the complications I mentioned in my earlier testimony about accessing generic services make it difficult for people just to get what they need, and that we ought to look at ways to simplify the processes so that people can get the services they need. I think one of the ironies is the DD system now is largely funded by Medicaid. Accessing healthcare services is funded by Medicaid. So in some ways, by sending people on this chase to get services from another agency just means that they're accessing Medicaid services through another agency. And I think in some ways that just doesn't make sense. I mean, maybe it made more sense when the DD system had more general fund, but probably not so much anymore. So with that, I would have the following recommendations. First, restore the services that were eliminated or capped during the bad economic times so that individuals who live in their family homes can more appropriately get the services that they need. That's camping, social recreation, and caps on respite services. Reevaluate the language that requires consumers to pursue administrative hearings and medical reviews before they can access certain kinds of services, which is just a barrier, and look for other ways to resolve the interagency dispute. If it's a Medicaid-funded service, does it really matter if it's paid for out of the healthcare services budget or the DDS budget? It might matter to the agencies, but it doesn't really matter to the state's bottom line. And there ought to be a way for the state agencies to resolve how that funding is going to work rather than the consumer having to go through all kinds of machinations just to get the service and in the meantime be delayed in getting that service. And then finally, just continue to provide oversight, as you have been doing, about the complexities of accessing generic services. And I note that you have a topic specifically related to behavioral health therapy, which is sort of the current next place that we're going to require people to transition from regional center behavioral health services to Medicaid behavioral health services. Again, it's all Medicaid-funded services, and we ought to make it work for the people we're trying to serve. So with that, thank you.